Hiya, my name is Jess and welcome to my channel, Reads with a Ravenclaw. Today I wanted to start doing a series of recommendation videos where I take a genre or a theme and recommend you books along those lines. And the first sort of genre category that I decided to talk about and make recommendations for is classics. If you look at me 2 or 3 years ago, I was somebody who was always too intimidated to pick up classics, and so I hardly read any at all, but I've definitely been getting more into them and experimenting more. If you can call it, is experimenting the right word for reading? I think experimenting is the right word for reading. But yes, I've been reading a lot more classics recently, and I've gained a much more of an appreciation for them than I had previously. I don't know if you can really call classics a genre, because obviously so many different subgenres, categories, periods exist within that, but these are 8 or 9 books that I really enjoy that are kind of defined under the umbrella of classics that hopefully you would enjoy too. So as this is a video about classic book recommendations, I thought it was only fitting to start with what is my favourite classic book of all time, and that is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Just in case you don't know, Jane Eyre follows the story of Jane Eyre, who starts out as a young orphan woman living within quite an abusive household, and tracks her journey as she grows up and becomes a governess and starts serving at Thornfield Hall, where she develops feelings for her boss, Mr. Rochester. Even in that synopsis there, I think I sold this as kind of a romance, and the romantic subplot is definitely a big part of Jane Eyre, but for me personally, it's not what draws me to this book at all. What draws me to this book is the character of Jane herself. Jane Eyre is one of my favourite, if not my favourite, female protagonist of all time. She is so strong and she defines her own self-worth. She doesn't wait for Rochester to come and do it for her. And considering the context of the time, just the amount of independence and self-worth that she defines for herself is absolutely incredible. Charlotte Bronte crafts Jane's voice so distinctly, and by the end of this book I felt like I understood her completely and deeply, and more than I've ever really understood any other fictional character ever. I also really loved all of the feminist themes and undertones in this book. It's something that I wasn't expecting the first time I read it, again due to the preconceptions I had about the time period, but it ended up being one of the things I loved most about the novel. It's just such a wonderful novel, and I read it for the first time 2 years ago, and I've reread it twice since. It's my favourite classic and I'm constantly coming back to it, so I would definitely recommend you picking this one up. This next book, I'm keeping it in the family, and I'm recommending The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. This is the story of a woman called Helen Huntingdon who has left her husband for reasons that you don't really find out until later in the novel, and it's told from the perspective of a young man called Gilbert Markham, who has his eyes set on Helen Huntingdon and starts to fall in love with her and unravel all of these layers of her past. Again, it was the feminist undertones of this one that drew me in. There's something very powerful about reading a book set in a time in which women were so completely oppressed, and in a time when divorce was so scandalous, and seeing a character who has to deal with that in the way that women like her would have been dealing with it at the time of the publication. I was really surprised when I picked up this novel at how brilliant it was and how much I enjoyed it, because I feel like Anne Bronte's works are very often overshadowed by Jane Eyre and by Wuthering Heights, and it shouldn't be, because it's such a wonderful work of literature on its own, and I would highly recommend it. We need to get Anne Bronte more attention, guys. She's incredible. Next up we have The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So this is a book that I studied in college last year, and I'd read it before that and hadn't really enjoyed it, so it was really the studying of this book that made me appreciate it much more. For those of you who don't know, The Great Gatsby follows a man called Nick Carraway who travels to New York in the 1920s and ends up caught up in this great mess of a love story between a very mysterious man called Jay Gatsby and the married Daisy Buchanan. It's a story about illusion and reality and the crumbling of the American dream, and it's just so wonderful. Like I said, I didn't enjoy this book very much the first time around I read it, but it was studying it and peeling back all of the themes and the layers of imagery and the character of Jay Gatsby himself that really made me love this novel. F. Scott writes characters in a way that's so interesting to me. I get the sense from reading them that he was a very cynical human being, because they're not very nice people for the most part in this book, but I feel like he completely understands what it is to be human and the crazy ornate workings of the 1920s society and the hopes for the American dream, and he is able to just kind of mush them all together in a way that's just so artistic and wonderful. This is such a short book, and it's not a difficult read in terms of reading level. I think something that often puts people off about classics is that they don't want to stumble through hours of really heavy prose, but this is quite It's not a simply written book, it's a very complex book, but it's not as challenging to read. I definitely recommend this one if you want to read more classics and haven't yet, because it's just such an excellent starting point. Next up, I'm going to be recommending 2 books by Jane Austen, which are Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. I absolutely adore Jane Austen's writing style. She's so witty, but she can balance that wit so wonderfully, so sometimes it comes through the writing in a way that's so subtle it takes rereads to pick it up, and then sometimes it's just so obvious and funny and charming. They read quite differently, which is why I decided to recommend both of these if you're looking to read Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice is undoubtedly her best known and probably most well loved work, and this is definitely the right Austen of the two for you if you're looking for like just a fun, upbeat love story with misjudgments and dramatic reveals. Whereas Persuasion is a book that I think is a lot more subtle with its love story. It hasn't got the outright combative kind of energy that Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet's relationship has, but it's so beautiful and so well done. The sexual tension in this book, you guys, the sexual tension. Of the two, my favourite is probably Pride and Prejudice, just because I am a fan of a hate to love story. It is a trope that I'm quite keen on, but there's just something about the kind of quietness and subtlety of Persuasion that gets me every single time, so I would highly recommend both of these. Next up, we have books that I don't actually have physical copies of because I got them out of the library or from school, but I would highly recommend them nonetheless, and the first one I would like to talk about is Little Woman by Louisa May Alcott. This was the first classic I ever read back when I was 11 or 12 years old. It was one of the only ones that I was brave enough to read because it was my best friend's favourite book, and it was wonderful. I always want to read Little Woman in autumn time or around Christmas, just with my book and a mug of hot chocolate, because there's just something about reading about a group of sisters, about a family trying to get through all of these challenges, that's just recognisable and comforting and wonderful to read, and I would highly recommend it. Next up, we have To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which again is a massive comfort read for me and is one of the most beautiful books I think has ever been written, just throwing that out there. Every time I read To Kill a Mockingbird, and I think I've read it about 3 times now in the past 4 years or so, I am just blown away by its simplicity and its beauty. It's such a wonderful human book. I think the reason I love To Kill a Mockingbird so much is just because it says so much about kindness and human decency, which is the theme that I don't think many classics address. I also really love the perspective of Scout Finch, that kind of retrospective looking back. It makes it feel so comforting and nostalgic in the same way that I find Little Woman nostalgic. I definitely say that of the two, To Kill a Mockingbird is a much more powerful and political read, yet for me that just theme of decency, that theme of kindness that comes through is very reassuring. So if you haven't read To Kill a Mockingbird yet, I would definitely recommend it. So the second to last book on my list is actually a play, and it is The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. The Importance of Being Earnest is a comedy of manners. It's an ironic look at the shallowness of Victorian society, and it follows 2 men who have to tell a few lies to be with the woman that they want to be with. The reason that I am recommending this classic is because I think it dispels this rumour that classics are serious and weighty, because to be honest with you, The Importance of Being Earnest is one of the funniest plays that I've ever read. Oscar Wilde just has such a sharp, observant wit, and it comes through so strongly in The Importance of Being Earnest. I love it. I've also read Lady Windermere's Fan by Oscar Wilde, which I would recommend as well, but I definitely think if you're looking to get more into classics, The Importance of Being Earnest is a really good place to start, because I think it really helps you to kind of shed all those preconceptions about classic literature, because what it essentially produces is just a very funny play that mocks society, and who doesn't love that? And the final book that I would like to recommend to you is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Again, The Bell Jar is quite a short book, but it packs such a punch. It is one of the most emotional and moving books that I've ever read. There's something very sad and emotional and poignant about the way that Sylvia Plath tracks Esther Greenwood's mental health, in that when the book starts out you can definitely sense her loneliness and her sadness, but the kind of experience of depression is something that happens quite subtly and quite sadly, and it's just, it knocks me out every time. It's such a sad and beautiful book. Okay, so those are all my recommended classics. I hope that I have persuaded you to pick one of them up, and if you've already read all of them, then I hope you just enjoyed remembering how great they are and seeing that I love them a lot too. Until next time, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.